We are out chasing down, I think, one of the most frustrating things in all scooters, period, and that's trying to chase down squeaks. Hey guys, it's Steve from Scooter King, and today we're out on a really beautiful fall day, and we're tracking down the one thing that probably drives people nuts more than anything else, and that's got to be stem squeak, or any kind of scooter squeak. So whether or not it's your handlebars or your stem, whatever it is a pain in the butt and really frustrating when you're trying to track it down. So today we're going to go through the most common areas of each type of scooter, and they're really only about 2 or 3 different types. There's the C-style suspension type that have a folding stem. So that's like this one that I'm on today. This is a Roadrunner RS5. And there's a ton of scooters with that frame style. And then there's the style that uses folding handlebars. And folding handlebars can suffer from the same exact problem. So the thing that makes it really hard is that squeaks are really hard to locate. The sound of them actually can be transmitted. It can actually pop up. It can be in one place and sound like it's coming from another place altogether. And that makes it really tough to track them down. So first we'll start with the folding stem style. These are really common. They break really at the stem position, and then they either have a twisting lug or a twisting nut or something like this that forces this metal piece into the stem, and then that locks the whole thing. And this is also true of the dual stem scooters as well, like the Kaabo Wolf series scooters or the T-Wing Mars. They all break at the stems at some point and then use some kind of locking mechanism. Some of the other places to look for are here in the shocks area, because the shocks and swing arm obviously are moving constantly, so you really want to hawkeye any of the moving swing arms and the front and back shocks, because those are really susceptible to kinds of rattling and noises and things. But when it comes to squeaks, you're really going to find those mostly in the shock absorber areas, both the top and the bottom where they mate to the frame and the swing arm. All right, we're back in the shop and we have both style scooters side by side here. We have the style that folds from the handlebars, and these type usually fold from the bracket at the bottom of the deck. And then we have the C-type suspension style, and these typically fold in half on the stem. So we have 2 of these side by side so we can lubricate both, and we're going to be using 2 different kinds of lubrication. We're going to be using white lithium grease for all the metal to metal parts that you can't see, and then we're going to be using Silicone Specialist by WD-40. But this isn't WD-40, it's a silicone spray that specifically is safe for rubber. This is super important because if this comes in contact with rubber, for example, like your suspensions or grommets or anything like that, it has to be safe for rubber because you don't want it to deteriorate that. So don't just use any lubrication. This we're going to be using for stuff on the outside of the scooter that we can see. And then the white lithium grease we're going to be using for all the metal to metal parts that are enclosed, like the stem brake and things like that, that we can't see, because this is not safe for rubber. All right, we're going to start with the C-type suspension first, and we're going to break the neck down and see where the squeaks happen most, because right now you can hear like that squeaking sound. We got to get rid of that. And it's really hard to tell where it's coming from because mostly the squeak sound itself radiates up the stem into the handlebars, it radiates down into the frame. And so it sounds like it's coming from a bunch of different places. In reality, it's mostly coming from one place. Let's check it out. So first we'll come to the latch mechanism here. This unscrews, but it's no different if you have a folding latch or a latch that secures or has a safety pin that secures. We'll undo the safety pin on the side here. We have to unloosen it a little bit more before we can, and then we'll drop the stem altogether. And you can see here, there's a lot of metal to metal contact here. And especially when this is forced all the way down into that channel, it's under a lot of stress, and that metal to metal contact is going to create squeaks. So we're going to use our white lithium grease here, and we're going to use a catch rag here so it doesn't go all over the place, because this stuff does kind of go all over the place, but we're only using it on places where you really can't see it. And the reason we're using lithium grease is because it stays put.
It's a lot more viscous than the silicone spray, which is great because it penetrates and gets down into nooks and crannies better. But here, we don't need it to do that. We mostly just need it to stay put. So we're going to take a bit of it on our finger and we're going to put it into the locking mechanism here as well. This is the part that gets forced into this little channel here. So we're going to put a little bit on there. And then we're also going to put some into the channel itself. And this is going to help it keep from squeaking when it's really under pressure, because you crank this thing down, like you really crank it down. In fact, you can even take a screwdriver and crank it even more down. And when it's under that kind of pressure, the two metals being forced together like that are going to make some noise. In addition, we're also going to go around the rest of the inside of this internal latch here, and we're going to cover it on all the different sides, every place where metal mates. So the base plate here, we're going to cover the sidewalls here and the top as well. And all of this is going to have white lithium grease. It's important to note, you don't need a ton of this. You don't have to just soak the thing. And if you do, that actually will give you more problems because it's going to eventually leak out. It's going to attract dust and a bunch of other stuff. So really less is more here. All we're trying to do is create enough of a bond between the two surfaces so that we don't get squeaking with metal to metal. And from here, we just screw it back into the locking mechanism here. And this would be the same if you have a latch or if you have a swing arm latch with a locking mechanism. It's all basically the same idea. From here, we're going to switch to our front suspension and we're going to start using our silicone spray instead, because these parts will be exposed and we'll see them. Plus, these penetrate better. So this is going to sink down into these cracks a lot better than the lithium grease is going to. And it's going to get into all of these swing arm parts and all of the shock absorber parts here. Again, less is more, especially when you're dealing with like around the shock, the top and the bottom travel area, especially where the shock meets the connection bolt to the swing arm. If you just drench everything, it's just going to collect road grime. One area to pay really close attention to is where the base of the shock connects to the swing arm. This is where a lot of contact takes place, and we don't need a ton of it, but we do need to get into both sides of this. And remember, on the back shock, the position of the shock is reversed, so it's upside down, and so the connection plate is up instead of down. You really want to get in here and get this well lubricated, since this is a really key area for shock related squeaks. And the last place we're going to lube on the front shocks is the back of the swing arm. If we turn the handlebars all the way to one side or the other, we can get to these really easily. And there again, we don't need a ton of this. We don't have to drench it. We just need enough for the silicone to soak into the joint itself, which it does pretty well. And a little bit here goes a long way. So we'll lube both of these sides here and then clean it up. Now it's time to switch to the rear shocks. The swing arm design's a little bit different here. It doesn't have that C-style suspension. So here we need to get into the swing arm joint. And same thing applies here. Just a little bit goes a long way, so we don't have to drench this, but we do need it to penetrate the entire thing. And also the inside of that bolt mechanism on this side. This is super important. We want to make sure we get both sides, the outside and the inside of this bolt. And like we said before, the shock is reversed in the back, so this is the top as opposed to the bottom, and we want to pay very close attention to its connection point here on this axle. We want to lube these two connections here on both sides of the shock and its connection to the swing arm. These are really prone to squeaks and that kind of stuff, and because they get a lot of road exposure, both wet and dry, and stuff builds up in here, these guys get noisy quick. And same thing applies here. A little bit goes a long way with the silicone. It gets into the joint pretty well, but we don't want to oversaturate it, as it's just going to collect a lot more road grime, and that makes the noise problem worse over time. And when we finally chase them all down, much quieter. And that's a gigantic difference just targeting those two major areas. The stem break point, be it a latch or a bolt or whatever, and the C-type suspension, the swing arms, and the shocks themselves. Those two areas make the biggest difference when it comes to getting rid of squeaks, at least on this style of scooter. And the second most common style of scooters to make a bunch of squeaks and noises are the folding handlebar style ones. These are the kind that fold down across the top here, and it's just a simple like T-style bracket like this, And this has like a telescoping frame to adjust the height of the handlebars. And then these just pull out or they unscrew like on the Solar EQ series and then fold down like this. And the reason that they're more prone to squeaks and noises is because there's more parts. So in addition to the regular style here, you know, the telescoping frame part itself that makes noise like that, we also have the more subtle style of squeak, which is actually right where the handlebar itself mates with the inside of that part. And there's a tiny little screw in there, and the screw itself, actually when you unscrew it, it actually starts to create more friction, and that's how these tighten, because the screw starts to butt up against the inside of that frame. But there we have a metal to metal problem. And so that's part of the squeak issue. So we have, it's twofold. It's the stem itself, this part that telescopes into the frame, and it's the folding handlebar part as well. So we got to lubricate it in two different places on this before we even get to the suspension, just to chase these guys down. So if we drop these down, you can see this is the little screw that's inside here. If we turn that counterclockwise, the handlebars will actually get tighter. So before we even lube this, it's a good idea to pull that screw all the way out and put some Loctite on it so it doesn't move easily, which it has a tendency to do. Once we've set the screw in its correct position, we're going to go ahead and take our white lithium grease and we're going to lube the inside of that little cavity there. Now, we're not trying to lube the screw. We don't want that to come loose. That was the purpose of the Loctite. This is just so that the top of the screw that comes in contact with the metal roof actually has some lubrication here and doesn't make squeaks. Then the last thing we're going to do is lube the outside of the barrel connector itself. This is because the barrel and its little catch here are both metal to metal contacts and they make a lot of racket. And so we're going to wet the outside of that and the inside of the barrel connector and rotate it a few times. And this makes for a really smooth connection. We'll wipe off the residue, and then this will really quiet down these handlebar squeaks. Then moving on down the stem, we're going to do the exact same thing to the scooter latch folding mechanism here. This is where the scooter front, stem, and tire and everything fold back. So this is really prone to noise here, and we're going to use our white lithium grease on this as well because we really want this stuff to stay put. And we're going to put a little bit of it on the inside of the latch as well. This is just so that it closes smoothly. We don't want to put a ton here because that latch can work itself loose, but we're using the white lithium grease here, like I said, because it stays put. And then we'll lube everything and move on to the shocks. Moving on to the front shocks, we're going to switch back to our silicone lubricant. And this is because we might come in contact with some plastic or rubber parts when we're actually working on the shocks. And this dual shock design, and a lot of models use this design, can get pretty rickety and noisy sometimes. So we're going to lube the bottoms of the shocks where it comes in contact with the base plates, the middle where the piston goes into the shock, and the top. Since these don't have a rubber grommet at the very top, they can get pretty noisy going over bumps and curbs. Now we're moving on to the back of the shocks, and what's really important about this is where the shock itself connects to the swing arm. This bracket or axle bolt here, as well as the bolts that connect it to the swing arm, are really prone to noise as they get really gummed up with road grime and that kind of stuff. So a little goes a long way here. We just want to penetrate all of these connections as best we can. And the final thing we're going to lube is the top shock attachment to the swing arm. This is where the motion takes place, and a little bit goes a long way. Like we said before, we're just going to get the silicone to penetrate these joints. We just want to get as much motion as we can without creating a bunch of grime and dust in here, but we really want to make sure that the shock itself and the swing arm moves freely and has no binding here. And as you can hear and see, much quieter in the overall handlebar mechanism part as well as the suspension. So a big difference, especially in this style of scooter with the telescoping handlebars, once you chase down those squeaks on the inside mechanisms and on the suspension itself, it makes a huge difference and an overall super quiet ride.
So just a little bit of squeak maintenance makes all the difference in the world, and it really turns your ride into just a smooth, solid monster. especially on a day like today that's just beautiful out. Once you really take care of all the noises and squeaks and everything, it's just smooth sailing from that point forward. Hey, thanks for coming out on the ride with me today, guys. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscription buttons, as it keeps the algorithm up and it helps me make more videos like this, and it helps keep a young channel like this going. Get out and enjoy this fall weather. It's beautiful outside and a perfect day to be on a scooter. Ride safe, have fun. We'll catch you guys in the next video.